without regard to any sort of benefits to the communities. The type of graduates that we are churning out will show you or will tell you that what is happening there is of very low standard. Regulations are just made left, right, without passing it through this house. And different universities have got different regulations. And all this is compromising with the quality of education. Honorable Speaker, recently I advertised some positions for a small company of mine, and I was conducting interviews. If you look at the papers those students are having, you will wonder what type of papers these are. So good, so nice, and you really long to see those students those interested guys to interview them. But when they come in front of you, the way they talk, the quality of their English, and if you give them a small written test, what they write, and the qualifications that they have in papers are so much contrary to one another. And you'll wonder what type of universities they have gone through. And because of that, the Parliament should make sure that proper regulations are passed, that regulations that are not beneficial to this country, to the education sector of this country, are annulled. Those which have already been in place are annulled, like what we are now doing. And for that matter, I stand to support the annulment of this regulation and many others which have similar sort of characteristics that do not help the Kenyan citizens in any way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The Honorable Samuel Atandi, member for Alego Usonga.
Madam Chair, I'm not ready to talk on this one.
Okay. The Honorable Mangale Chiforomodo, member for Lungalunga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to support the report for this committee that this regulation needs to be nullified, because then the powers of this House has been actually been abused. When we allow such acts to take place in Kenya, then we will find ourselves not useful to the country. And of course, it is our mandate to regulate and also to do laws for this country. Madam Speaker, these new regulations which were set actually were detrimental, because you find very new issues were introduced, right from the funding to management of the capitations and also the loans, which has brought a lot of confusion to the students of this country and also the parents. So I don't wish to take a lot of time, but Madam Speaker, I wish to stress that the work of legislation should be left to the National Assembly and not any other entity. For this matter, I wish to stress and assert that I support the proposal by the committee to nullify the regulation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. If everybody took as short as Honorable Mangale, I think many of us will be able to contribute. I hope you can take the cue from him. The Honorable Agnes Pareyo, member for Narok North.
Speaker, for giving this opportunity to discuss the regulations And because it is the mandate of this House to come up with the regulations, because it is us that are supposed to set what we need our ministries or our departments to follow. And so I also feel that they have taken the responsibilities of the legislators to come up with the legislation so that we can have the controls of all what happens in all the departments. And so I also support the decision of the committee that things came up with this idea of saying that legislation should be left to the members of parliament. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Rachel Nyamai, member for Kitui South.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. First of all, I would like to thank the chair of the committee, the Honorable Chepkonga, for doing a very good job for this House. And to note that I have been following the work that the committee has been doing, and when they annul a regulation, they have been giving very good recommendations to the concerned institution. And on this particular one, they have also done the same. Identified the areas of weakness, identified areas of contradiction, and given a very good way forward on how these regulations can be brought back to this House so that they can be passed in the right way. Honorable Speaker, looking at this regulation that has been annulled, we see an institution that has the roles that it was initially given being taken away through a regulation that has not been brought regularly. And this is the institution called the Kenya National Qualifications Authority, which was created in 2015 with the purpose of ensuring that there is a proper harmonization and coordination of training, of assessment, and generally education, and ensuring that there are proper standards in the education sector. Honorable Speaker, for this institution to be denied its role through this regulation and these roles being given to another entity is not right. So for that reason, Honorable Speaker, I support this annulment. And also agree with the committee that they must go back, the ministry should go back, look at where they went wrong, ensure that they do not contradict existing laws and other regulations so that they can bring it properly. Honorable Speaker, also in this report, the committee has indicated clearly that these regulations are bringing extra costs, not only to the universities, but all other institutions that are within the universities, including our businessmen and businesswomen that are operating in these universities. It is affecting lecturers, it is affecting students, it is affecting researchers, and many others that are working here in these universities. And also, the committee chair has clearly explained that there is no survey that was done to show what was the impact of these regulations in all the communities that are within the universities. And for that, Honorable Speaker, I agree with the committee that we cannot pass a regulation which has not clearly provided for for a report to show that a survey was done to show the impact of these regulations in the people who have brought us to this House. And Madam Speaker, this being the institution that represents the common people, we must say that this does not qualify. Honorable Speaker, also very importantly and clearly elaborated by the chair is the matter of public participation, which this House has taken seriously, including the budget-making process, Madam Speaker, where it is clear that we cannot pass anything without going back to the people that we represent to ask them what is their opinion. Madam Speaker, these regulations, when they were being brought here, public participation was not done, so we do not know what the universities themselves think, especially the university community, not the leadership of the university, and all the other entities. We do not know what they think about this. So, Madam Speaker, based on those 3 points, I would like to agree with the chair of the report of this committee, the Honorable Chepkonga, and the committee, that these regulations must be annulled, taken back to the universities so that they can be brought through the front door and not through the back door. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity.
The Honorable Moses Ingenda, member for Malava.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, what I'm realizing is that being Vice Chair of Education Committee, we feel embarrassed because part of our functions is to oversight universities. Madam Speaker, it's very surprising that regulations that are governing universities have come straight to the House through the Committee on Implementation. I would urge that, Madam Speaker, maybe we look at how we develop these regulations. It would be very important, Madam Speaker, that these regulations or such regulations, before they are presented before the House, they pass through the relevant committee for the input of the committee before they come to the committee chaired by Chepkonga, Madam Speaker, so that we cannot have this kind of situation where regulations for the entire university system are actually honored on the floor of the House. Madam Speaker, thank you.
The Honorable Member for Arieda, Dr. Otiendo Amolo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on this consideration of the report by the Delegated Legislation Committee, I support the motion. And just some very quick points. Madam Speaker, it must be remembered that Article 94 and 95 of the Constitution have always remained very clear. Nothing will have the force of law in this country unless it is passed by Parliament. And sometimes people forget that. They think that they can hide under subsidiary legislation or regulation and pass laws that will have the effect of law. They must be remembered that will not happen. And I want to commend the committee for this kind of move. Madam Speaker, it must be said that however good intentioned one is, it is not sufficient to consult some people outside or even those in the executive or the judiciary or any other arm of government and assume that you can overlook Parliament. I am even shocked to hear that such regulations could be proposed without engaging the relevant Committee on Education. That is outrageous. I think that is something that must be discouraged at all levels. Any regulations made under any particular area must involve the relevant committee before it is then presented as regulations to be adopted. Madam Speaker, it is quite important to note that especially in the education sector, there is so much that is going on. There are so many committees. As we speak, I'm aware that there had been a committee that was appointed to look into various areas, especially in re-engineering the education sector. To the best of my knowledge, that report has not been considered by this House, either in terms of amending the Act or in terms of any regulations. But I'm surprised that I learned that my very good friend, Professor Dote, and a team have now been appointed as the implementing committee. They've already started implementing something that has not been passed as law, something that has not been even considered in terms of regulations. I think that is utter contempt for the National Assembly. That is the perfect example of why we must send a warning to all those who think they can bypass Parliament by bringing policy and implementing it before it becomes law. These regulations must not just be rejected, but they must be rejected with a very clear message that if you bring another set without consulting the relevant committee, without consulting the public, then they will be rejected until doomsday. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dagoretti South, Honourable John Waweru.
Madam Speaker, I thank you. Madam Speaker, it is the English that say that you have not succeeded until your successor succeeds. And Madam Speaker, you performed exemplarily well in this committee of delegated legislation. And you're succeeding even further because your successor is actually doing an impressive job. Madam Speaker, I would like to start by congratulating the Committee on Delegated Legislation for such a good report that they bring to us. And we are convinced, Madam Speaker, we are convinced that these regulations ought to be annulled in their entirety. Madam Speaker, if these regulations were just offending some regulations, or offending a policy, or offending a legislation, maybe this House would have been a bit kinder. But these regulations are offending the supreme law, the Constitution. Madam Speaker, it is the Constitution that requires that there should be robust public participation. This House has spoken severally. The seat you are sitting on has pronounced itself severally that public participation cannot be seen to just be a PR exercise. Substantive public participation on these regulations did not happen. Not only did public participation not happen, Madam Speaker, on an issue that affects so many students, so many parents, so many families, there was no demonstration that there had been a regulatory impact assessment done on these regulations. Madam Speaker, on that count, these regulations must be annulled. Madam Speaker, there is a lot happening in the education sector. And one key thing that has happened in the last few months is the Presidential Task Force, Madam Speaker. It is making proposals, proposals which would have found their ways in some of these regulations, Madam Speaker. The task force recommendations were blatantly ignored. They are totally ignored in these regulations. And Madam Speaker, that forms another basis for annulment of these regulations. Madam Speaker, there is a whole issue of the revocation of chartered to universities, Madam Speaker. That issue, Madam Speaker, denies the right that institutions, universities, and learning institutions do have in being able to enjoy the privileges that come with the charters that have been accorded to them. If they are revoked without due process, Madam Speaker, it is injurious to institutions, to their learners, and to the entire communities that are there, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, finally, I would like to say that the premium that we have put on university education in this country ought to be rethought. Madam Speaker, we are a country that is developing. We ought to start thinking about our technical secondary schools, our technical universities, our technical polytechnics, Madam Speaker, so that every learner that goes through high school should not be willing to just take up a professional course in the name of a degree. The degrees that we have produced in this country, Madam Speaker, have become a burden on the carriers of these degrees. If we proliferated our education in such a way that some of our students take up the professional courses, others take up some technical courses, we will find that there will be use for the youth who end up in technical courses in the development of our country. But today, every learner wants to go to university and get a degree that will condemn them to tarmacking for years on end after being accorded that degree. So, Madam Speaker, even as we are annulling these regulations, maybe it is a wake-up call for us to rethink the entire policy around how we train our population for the future and the development of our country. Madam Speaker, I stand to support the proposal by the committee to annul these regulations in their entirety. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Julius Melly, member for Tinderet, but before you speak, allow me to recognize the following school. I wish to recognize the following school: the Catholic School from Langata constituency, Nairobi County. Welcome to the National Assembly.
Thank you, Honorable
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to support the chair of the delegated committee and more specifically the membership. Honorable Madam Speaker, when you actually look at most of the regulations brought to this House, in most cases, it speaks into issues that are very important to the running of the various sectors of this country. But Honorable Madam Speaker, one thing which has given this, many members in this House a surprise is that many of the officers will always try to develop regulations that are completely out of touch with the reality. Let me just point out that as a requirement, there is need for public participation in developing any regulation. The university's regulation that has been annulled, or actually which the committee seeks to annul, did not even come to the education committee as part of public participation, inputting, and even discussing it. This is a show of, I would say that there is a lot of impunity by the part of the ministry, and more so the State Department. They know very well that the members of the Education Committee, the members of the Fraternity of Education have to speak into every aspect of regulation, because it is very important that these regulations are discussed by the public, by the various stakeholders, and even the delegated legislature itself. You look at the regulation, some of the things that were passed in the Presidential Working Party are supposed to be aligned, because these regulations are alive to those issues. But you realize that the regulations are so stale that they don't speak into the issues of the Presidential Working Party. A number of issues that the university's regulations are speaking into have actually been overtaken by the events. So, Madam Speaker, the chair of the delegated committee actually did it very well, and I want to commend him and ask him that in future, every other committee, more so the departmental committees, are supposed to speak to every regulations. The regulations on transport, the regulations on maritime authority, the regulations on agriculture, crops, and all the rest shall go to the relevant departmental committees for discussion, for adoption, so that the public are aware and actually brought into line. Looking even into the issues, there are a number of reforms that are going on in the education sector. Looking into the funding formulas, the CBC, and all that. If you look at the university's regulations, they have spoken very little into them. That means that these regulations are actually supposed to be annulled because they are outdated. I support the annulment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The Honorable Member for Karachuonyo, Honorable Andrew Akuome.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity. Madam Speaker, I note that the Constitution is paramount. It is important. It lays down what must be done in order that we can be able to enhance, improve, and really put in order our education system. University is the final institution to which people go to obtain their degrees for the purposes of getting this country to develop and achieve many other goals. I see that when the regulations we are talking about were brought up, the procedure was almost ignored. There was no public participation, which is very, very essential and is in the Constitution. And that alone is enough reason to nullify this regulation before we even go further. Again, in Parliament, we have a procedure. We know what committee handles what and which other committee also, handles for the purposes of being in order. Because the procedure was not followed and because participation was not done, Madam Speaker, I totally support a nullification of these regulations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. And I kindly request Honorable Member for Dagoretti South, Honorable KJ, pull out your card because you've spoken. Honorable Who else had spoken that has their cards here? Honorable Amolo Otiende, kindly pull out your card. So I'm left with only the people who have not spoken. Makes it easier for me. All right, and Honorable Atandi, remove your card because you had gotten a chance and you passed it. So pull out your card also. The Honorable Owen Bayer, member for Kilifi North. No, let's go. You've now dropped down to the list. Member for Kilifi North, Honorable Owen Bayer.
Honorable Speaker.
Then next we'll have Honorable Anthony Alwatch. I think you're next.
Honorable Speaker, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity and also to pass my appreciation to the Committee of Delegated Legislation for the work they have done. Honorable Speaker, while many members agree with the committee, and I agree in the committee, that we annul these regulations in their entirety. But, Honorable Speaker, this begs certain questions beg some answers. One of them, yes, Parliament has Article 95, that we are the sole house to make laws. But again, the establishment of the delegated committee in this National Assembly shows that it is possible to have another body make law with the authority of this House. And that's why we have the Committee of Delegated Authority that looks at those laws and passes them. And we even have something called subsidiary legislation. Subsidiary legislation does not usurp the legislative authority of the House. And that is why regulations must always come to the House. But what keeps me asking myself this question is, and I want the Honorable Chepkonga, the chairman, to listen to this. For how long will this House continue to annul all regulations? For how long? Because every time Honorable Chepkonga stands to speak on regulations, he always says annul in entirety. Annul in entirety. Honorable Speaker, you once served as the Honorable Chair of this committee. I know you also said many annul, but there are times also where you said approve. Now, Honorable Speaker,
let's allow Honorable TJ Kajwang. What's your point of order?
Madam Speaker, you know in this House learning does not stop, but the majority leader, whom I have a lot of respect to, seems to have misconstrued the standing order, which is very clear that in all instances where Honorable Chepkonga comes to approve or accepts legislation, those set of legislations will not come before this House. They will just write a letter to the executive. And in so many cases, in fact, more than half of what they are doing, they are approving those legislations. But you'll never see them come before the House. It is only when we annul legislations that it comes to this House. No wonder you now see so many annuls rather than approvals. Thank you. I think he is forgetting that.
Thank you, thank you. And it is true, and I want to...
Proceed, Honorable
I agree. But I also want to say this, that why did the Ministry of Education develop these regulations? Because there's a lacuna somewhere. We need to fill certain gaps. And when they do it wrongly, and the ministries continue to do it wrongly, it behoves on us as Parliament to also, and chairs of departments, to also have a sitting with the executive and tell them what needs to be done. A lot of the times when we have these annulments is because of issues of procedure. Procedure that would have been corrected even before this matter comes to this House for annulment. So what I want to urge is chairmen of departments. Some of these ministers are new. They are greenhorns in what they are doing. They may not understand a lot of things. And at the same time, the technocrats in the ministry may not advise them properly. But I know the Cabinet Secretary for Education was a member of this Honorable House. He's a fine gentleman. I do not think he would fail to listen to the Honorable Chepkonga if we called him aside and said, you see, I've seen those regulations have issues, and we could help you to thrash them out and tweak them up so that they can be useful for the country. Now, a whole process, a lot of time has been wasted only to come and annul. The education system does not get better because we have annulled. It does not get better. The issues in the universities do not get a solution because we have annulled. We do not get solutions for the issues that demand that subsidiary legislation be made because we have annulled. They can only get better when we consult and look for solutions so that our young people in the universities who are suffering do not continue to suffer because a minister somewhere did not follow procedure. What I want to ask the Honorable Chepkonga and his...
Honorable Chepkonga, what's your point of order?
No. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. You know the Deputy Majority Leader is my very good friend. We are very progressive in our committee. In fact, when we bring to the House for annulment, we have exhausted all procedures, including recommending to them that they should go and amend. In fact, Madam Speaker, maybe the Majority Leader may not be aware. The Honorable Duale brought the peacekeeping regulations. We told him these regulations are very bad. 1, 2, 3. He said he purported to support the regulations. At the end of the day, he said, I agree with the committee. He withdrew the regulations, amended them. We brought to the House for approval. So what we do, in fact, most of the time, it's only that this minister, we told him that these regulations are not good. Go and amend the following. They came back with justification. How do you justify where you have not done public participation? Where you have no regulatory impact assessment? How do you justify that one? You know, we would like to support ministries, Madam Speaker, but they must comply with the law. We are not here to help them to comply with the law. They know what the law says. In fact, when you are appointed as a minister, you have the Attorney General, you have the state councils. You should be able to consult with even our own state councils within Parliament. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. You may proceed to complete, Honorable Baya.
Let me complete. This mic, not this one. Okay. So what I want to say is that we need to find a solution for universities. We have a problem in universities. Today, a lot of our children are not going to school. They're not joining universities because of the issues that these regulations tried to address. So, and the role of legislation is our role as members of Parliament. And instead of waiting for subsidiary legislation, I want to urge the chairman who was here, the chairman and the vice chairman who have spoken on this motion, that why don't they take up the role? Give the right path, because legislation is our role. If the minister fails to legislate, it is not him who has failed, it is Parliament that has failed. So if our children continue to suffer out there because of lack of proper law, because of lack of legislation or regulations, Parliament has failed in its role. I will not depend on a cabinet secretary to make laws, because that is not his mandate. So while they have annulled, I want to ask Honorable Meli and Malulu Ajendi, who is here, to take up the role, solve the issues that are there so that these problems cannot continue to be there. I thank you, Honorable Speaker, and I wouldn't want to be informed.
I think you exhausted your time. Okay, proceed, Honorable Otiende.
Well, I had wanted to raise a point of order, whether it's in order for the Deputy Majority Whip to condemn Parliament for having failed in its role, when he knows that the role for making regulations is not for Parliament. Every legislation indicates who makes the regulations. So it is for those people to make the regulations, then consult Parliament, not the other way around. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, now let's proceed. I think we are making progress. No, your time is over. Honorable TJ Kajwang, that's my place to say, it's not your place. Okay, I'll give you exactly 1 minute. And then we can move on to Honorable Anthony. I'll watch.
Honorable Speaker, I want to ask the senior counsel. He knows there are problems in education and he has said it. The role to make law in this country belongs to this House. I challenge you to go make the law and unhook the issues that we have in education, so that this country knows you are not just a good lawyer in court, but you're also a useful legislator. I thank you.
Okay, I think this is going very well. If we have few points of order, I think everyone will have an opportunity. I can see I have 11 requests. So we are going to Honorable Anthony Olwach, member for Mathare. Then we'll go to Honorable Mugambi, member for Buri. Then we go to Honorable Julius Ruto, member for Keses. And I think everybody will get a chance to speak who's left. But Honorable Julius Olosunkuli, please remove your card. You already spoke to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And let me also join my colleagues in thanking the Honorable Chepkonga and the committee for making these reports, and also join the Honorable John Kiarie for thanking Madam Speaker as the predecessor of the chair currently for a very good job done in the 12th Parliament, because it set a very good basis for what they are doing now. Madam Speaker, like the Honorable TJ has said, we are constantly learning, and I would have the benefit of learning from my senior Otiende Amolo on whether the House actually has no role in lawmaking. My respectful view is that all lawmaking pursuant to Article 94(5) belongs to this House, and that all other persons who exercise that role only exercise it in delegated format. They only exercise it in that format, and it does not mean that they become the lawmaker. The lawmaker under 94(5). Thank you, Senior Counsel. So I proceed to my main point. Madam Speaker, the role of the delegated committee, it plays a very important role in terms of checking the entities of government, including cabinet secretaries, board chairs, all of whom exercise that delegated role of subsidiary legislation, especially when they exercise it to make bad law, which, unless it comes to this House in a negative format, where now the delegated committee has to make a recommendation for annulment, would otherwise become law. I have heard the distinguished chair, Honorable Chepkonga, say that the delegated committee brings regulations for annulment only as a last resort. And even after begging the cabinet secretary to amend, that is when they bring it. That is very absurd. And I'm not saying absurd because I disagree with the chair. Absurd because under 94(5) we are the lawmaking organ, but yet we have to beg a cabinet secretary, please relook this and bring it back in an acceptable format. It is for this reason, Madam Chair, that I think that the Statutory Instruments Act and our standing orders need to be relooked. And I think the Honorable Horan Bayer sits in the committee that I sit of, House Rules and Procedure. And Madam Speaker, who has just vacated the chair, who chairs that committee, we have accepted a recommendation that I placed, that we amend the Statutory Instruments Act and we amend our standing orders to require that all regulation, whether affirmative or in the negative or in the positive, must find their way to this House, either by way of a report, so that this House may be able to stamp its foot of authority and say, proceed or do not proceed. That is the only way we can affirm our role under Article 94(5) and 95 of the Constitution. Madam Speaker, I also say this in light of provisions of the Constitution, which I hope at some point we will be able to relook. Under Article 115(7), we allowed, and the Honorable Otiende Amolo was there, will give us the benefit of what was the reasoning, allowed the President to make law and act as a lawmaker through the back door by allowing what you call presidential reservations. So that when you cannot raise the 2/3 requisite as a House to disagree with the President, that provisions become law. It should be the other way around. When we pass a law, the President should raise 2/3 to disagree with us. that is when we will exercise the supremacy of this house. And we borrowed the model of the US presidential system. And the US presidential system has said, time without number, and I just want to quote, the Supreme Court of the United States, Clinton versus New York, where it said that line veto amendment is unconstitutional. You cannot allow part reservations or line amendment of a law that we have made.
Honorable Anthony Oloch, we have would you like to be informed by the Honorable Otiende Amolo?
Thank you.
Would you like to be informed?
Thank
Okay,
you. Thank you, Honorable
proceed.
Oloch. Madam Speaker, I wanted to invite to inform Honorable Oloch on two issues. One is in respect of what he sought my concurrence on. And indeed, I agree with Honorable Oloch, and Honorable Owen Bayer is wrong. Under Section 70 of the Universities Act, the power to make regulations is for the Cabinet Secretary. It is the Cabinet Secretary who must propose those regulations, then bring it to the Delegated Legislation Committee. It is not for the Delegated Legislation to generate them. It would be unconstitutional. And that's the first information.
Honorable Otiende Amolo, I know you are very smart, but are you informing the Honorable...
I'm informing the Honorable
member
Oloch.
for Mathare, or you are informing...
I'm informing the member for Mathare because he concurred.
Deputy Majority...
He had concurred with the majority, with the minority deputy whip. Anyway, the second information is to Honorable Lodge. In truth, the Constitution does not allow the President to make any law. The Constitution allows the President to make reservations to any law that we have passed. The bad practice that the presidents have had of proceeding to amend the law and present it is not in tandem with the Constitution. So do not blame the Constitution, blame the practice, and blame us as a House who allowed that to happen. Thank you.
Well, I hope that, just for neatness, I hope that the information that you have been given by the Honorable Otiende Amolo enriches your debate. What is out of order, Honorable Bayer?
Amolo mentioned me. I would like to say, I agree with...
so now what is out of order, Honorable Bayer?
What is out of order is that he imputes improper, that I do not know what Section 70 says. I know what Section 70 knows, and I'm alive to it. And I know that the minister is supposed to make you regulations. Yes, that I know. But I also know that if the minister fails to make regulations, this House can stamp its authority and make law in the main law, and not just subsidiary regulation. That can be done, and the Committee for Education can do it. So he should not think I know. Only he needs to be... Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable Bayer. This is a house of debate, and he has gotten an opportunity to stick to what he had said. So, Honorable Member for Mathare, please proceed, conclude.
Thank you. Thank you, and I thank the Honorable Otiende Amolo for that information, that the reason that I was bringing the Clinton versus New York case was to demonstrate that what they said, that when you cherry pick a particular line in a proposed legislation sent to you for assent and propose amendment, that which they call line vetoing was said to be unconstitutional, and to the extent that we have that provision in our Constitution that allows a similar mischief is unconstitutional. And I say it overall in the context that we cannot allow ministers and other entities to use the avenue of regulations to stick in things that are unconstitutional and go contra to our powers under Article 94. So I support the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Member for Mathare. Honorable members, I would like to acknowledge, seated in the public gallery this morning, City Primary School from Kajiado East, Kajiado County. Help me to welcome them to the House. Joy Nairobi School, Kikuyu, constituency, Kiambu County. You are welcome to the National Assembly to observe proceedings in the House. Honorable members, I would also like to welcome our students Seated in the Speaker's Gallery this morning, Kabiro Secondary School, Dagoretti North, Nairobi County. You are welcome to the National Assembly. Honorable members, I would also like to communicate that order number 16, a motion on expansion of drug and substance abuse rehabilitation centers, order number 16, by the Honorable John Makali, Member of Parliament. He requested that it be dropped, and this was assented to by the Speaker, so it is therefore dropped. Honorable members, going back to the debate, we have the Honorable Mogambi Rindikiri. Member for Buri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I join the rest of the members in arguing that we annul these regulations in totality. Madam Speaker, let me thank the committee in charge because of putting a hawk eye on irregularities and illegalities in the decision-making, particularly when the law is involved. Madam Speaker, it's very disturbing in as much as we would like to defend the position of our cabinet secretaries and the government. I think there are some obvious things that we cannot do as a house. Mr. Speaker, we cannot have a situation where one arm of the government is not respecting the other arm of the government in making decisions. Madam Speaker, the Kenya National Qualifications Authority is an established institution under the law. And therefore, when the ministry ignores their input when making regulations, it leaves a lot to be desired. Madam Speaker, this authority has the capacity to advise and consult when it comes to regulations on how best to run the universities. Therefore, Madam Speaker, with that, this is very important that the Cabinet Secretary reverts back to his desk and start making proper decisions. Madam Speaker, any action which has element of costs to the community need to be taken very seriously. We have students, parents, guardians, and when we make a regulation that imposes costs to these people, it is very bad and it should not be allowed to happen. Madam Speaker, this animal called public participation, it is in the Constitution. I wonder what a special preference the ministry have that they cannot conduct public participation when making regulations. That's a very important element in the process of making the law and also coming up with the regulations. Madam Speaker, the Cabinet and Secretary of Education and his technocrats within the ministry have totally failed to conduct a public participation, and therefore this regulation cannot be passed. Madam Speaker, it is the time that now we take the issues of Parliament in as far as decisions of making is concerned.
Honorable Rindikiri, what is out of order? Honorable Wanjiku Muya, member for Kipipiri. Please pass the mic to the member for Kipipiri.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I'm studying in pursuant to studying order number 95. Looking at the debate, everyone is in agreement that a matter like this without public participation is null and void, and continuing to debate will be repeating ourselves, and as such, I'm requesting if you can ask the mover to reply.
Can I proceed, Madam Speaker?
I'll give a chance to the member for Mburi to finalize, then I'll find out whether it is the mood of the House that we
Madam Speaker, the future of education in this country.
Order members, the member for Buri shall be heard in silence.
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, the future of education in this country depends solely on the decisions that we shall make as a country, and specifically those in charge of education. Madam Speaker, the education sector right now as it is in a lot of problems. Madam Speaker, we have had commissions formed. We have seen the president forming task forces, and once these task forces give the information, it is never taken into consideration. I therefore, Madam Speaker, argue that these regulations are dropped in totality. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable members, I still have 10 requests, and I would like to find out whether it is the mood of the House that we make use of Standing Order number 95. Honorable members, I would like to put the question to find out whether it is the mood of the House that the mover be called to reply. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say nay. Nay. The ayes have it. So then, honorable members, I call upon the mover to reply.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank all the members who have contributed and those who intended to do so, because they were all supporting this motion. And so I'd like to thank them very much. And I'd like to assure the House that when we bring a regulation for annulment, we have approved another 13 or 15. And we report to the House every 3 months of all the regulations that the committee has approved. And we normally table here. So we recommend annulment of regulations on extreme cases where the regulating making authority refuses or rejects our proposal to revoke the regulations and amend them. For instance, even in this one, Madam Speaker, you know I am not very pro-annulment. I am always recommending to them, please, this one here, please kindly do so. But when they refuse, like they did in this one, seeking to justify why public participation was not held, why regulatory impact assessment was not conducted, we said, no, we will not agree, Madam Speaker, because this is something that is affecting the people. It is in contravention of the Constitution, Article 118, Article 10, Article 259, and Article 47. And so with those remarks, Madam Speaker, I move. I thank you.
You beg to reply? Honorable members, I now put the question, that this House adopts the report of the Committee on Delegated Legislation on its consideration of the Universities Regulations 2023, laid on the paper of the House on Thursday, the 14th September 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of and pursuant to the provisions of Section 18 of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013 and Standing Order 210-4B, announce in its entirety the Universities Regulations 2023, published as legal notice number 56 of 2023. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
Order number 15, motion. Consideration of the report on the proposed reduction of projected ceilings for Kenya Rural Roads Authority for the financial year 2024-2025 and 2025-2026.
Chairperson, Departmental Committee on Transport and Infrastructure. The Honorable Member for Ndia.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that this House adopt the report of the Departmental Committee on Transport and Infrastructure on its consideration of the proposed reduction of projected ceilings for Kenya Rural Roads Authority, popularly known as KERA, for the financial year 24-25 and 25-26, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, that is yesterday, 26th September 2023. Honorable Speaker, just to give a background on this matter, on Tuesday, 22nd August 2023, the committee noted and deliberated on the contents of a communication from the Kenya Rural Roads Authority head office to regional directors regarding reduction of projected funding ceilings to the constituency roads for 22% and 15%, and to the critical roads from 10%